Plans for US regime change in a wave of action coming up.
Communities across the states launched the American Spring. Why the government killed Martin Luther King. And drone pilots refuse to kill.
Corrupt dictators, the automatic cry when the White House wants another country regime changed. The site Informed Consent notes look closer to home. $32 trillion, double the size of everything the entire United States produces, is hidden primarily in the West by multinationals and Wall Street banks in offshore tax havens instead of the country's crumbling infrastructure or schools. The uncomfortable truth, notes scholar Juan Cole, the world's most corrupt state by far is the US. As for accusing others of being dictators, Countercurrents notes America's become the dictator nation. 55 million people have been killed by US bombing and Western-backed coups since 1945, dwarfing the numbers killed by Nazi death squads. The money required to keep this unprecedented death machine going now takes 68 cents of every taxed dollar. Half of Americans now live below or near the poverty line, and 17 million US children go to bed hungry, unable to afford enough food. Professor Charles Derber found the US government itself has become a regime and requires urgent change. The current structure in 1981 began systematic dismantling of the New Deal. Inequality has shot up ever since, and the figurehead changes nothing. Professor Derber joins us. Great to speak to you. Why do you write this system's no longer democracy?
Well, Americans like to think of themselves as a democracy. In a corporate regime, it's more what I call a corpocracy, which is not really a democracy at all. It operates really in the service. It has formal elections, and people have the right to vote, but it doesn't produce a government that's accountable to ordinary people. It produces a government that's accountable to very big concentrations of money.
On Friday, communities started the 3-month wave of action for change, ending on July 4th, Independence Day. Friday was the anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination. In what the Examiner notes was the real trial of the century, court found the Reverend was killed by US government. Such were the implications. The entire mainstream media simply ignored the trial, and most people never found out. At the time of his murder, King was moving from civil rights to attacking two central pillars of the establishment: war and inequality. Professor Michael Nagler found King was assassinated while planning a mass encampment of the poor in the Capitol and the Pentagon, the same battles now being fought in his memory today. Professor Nagler joins us. Really great to speak to you. What actually happened?
What really led to the assassination was his proposal to have a march on the Pentagon. In other words, he had shifted from being against racism in the southern United States to being against poverty in the American system overall. And from there, he was actually planning to take on militarism. 4 assassinations, the 2 Kennedy brothers, Martin Luther King, and Mahatma Gandhi. And in all of these cases, it was because of the commitment to peace and the frightened reaction against that commitment. Kennedy and Khrushchev were starting some kind of rapprochement, and it's for that reason that there may have been others, of course, but for that reason, apparently, that Kennedy was cut off. So this is a shocking reminder to the peace movement.
The wave of action joins the biggest youth civil disobedience in a generation. Hundreds of rallies across the state started symbolic oil spills, including outside the house of John Kerry, whose State Department approved the Keystone XL project, and the White House, where several hundred peaceful protesters have been arrested, asking Obama not to break another 2008 promise. Demonstrators expect the same police brutality as previous rallies when Iraq vet Scott Olson was critically wounded by officers. Stephen Lemmon's author of Banker Occupation. He joins us. Great to see you. What do you make of this brutal police response?
My own city of Chicago. Chicago is called the police repression capital of America. Well, there were plenty of brutal police repression capitals of America. We saw the brutality of police, including of my own city in Chicago, attacking nonviolent protesters, arresting them, beating them up, just treating them horrifically. And I even had some conversations with a couple of Chicago police and saying to them, you know, these are your people. You're a working stiff like they are. Why are you on the wrong side? The last thing you want to do is beat up on them.
US regime changes abroad tend to be brutal. Leaked images show NATO training Ukraine's neo-Nazis. The CIA murder manual for Latin America calls for sabotage and assassination of officials. But a landmark Harvard study found peaceful protests have twice the success rate, and the magic number's 3.5. Even violent regimes give way when just 3.5% of the population take action together. The Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies says peaceful protest forces change even when authorities use overwhelming violence. Proven tactics include using power in numbers, public theatre, guerrilla marketing, strikes and sit-ins, and pulling people out of pillars of support. Lawyer and activist Kevin Zeese joins us. Thank you very much for coming on. Can people actually achieve defection of security forces?
Well, you know, it's a very interesting thing watching U.S. security forces. You know, there are definitely people in the police force who are sympathetic to the issues we raise because they're affected by them. Their sons and daughters are also paying high college costs and going into debt to pay tuition. Their families are also paying high health care costs and facing bankruptcy for have a serious health problem, even if they have insurance, because insurance is so inadequate in the United States. And so on issue after issue, they're affected, and many police actually work without contracts. And there was recently protests across the country against Walmart for their poverty wages. We saw police in New Jersey being very nice to protesters who they arrested, but being very nice to them. They support their cause. The government's so corrupt and dysfunctional, we don't expect change. We certainly recognize the need to pull people from the security state to the popular movement and for them to realize that they are not the enemy. It's the system and the policies that they are forced to enforce that really are the problems.
I'm the officer that refused to remove his mask when asked to by the police department. I'm a 15-year veteran of the City of North Miami Beach Police Department, 4-year veteran of the military. I did 4 years in the Marines. And yeah, I've been thrown into the spotlight.
I'm going to have to ask you to take the mask off, though.
Under what statute?
8, there's a statute.
I explained to her the statute under the Florida state law that 876.12, the statute she charged me with, was not put into place for peaceful protests. I have children, and I don't have the luxury of not being involved. I would just implore them to get involved and, you know, turn off the television, turn off the sports, and really live for the oath that they took an oath to, their city, their country. There's a war coming, so, you know, it's time to fight.
The Military Times admits 75% of US troops oppose starting another war, this time on Syria. Recruiters complained to the Senate Armed Services Committee that it will be hard to find new recruits this year, as a majority of, quote, authority figures now advise against enlisting. Obama admits there's an epidemic of suicide in the military. More than 22 US veterans and troops are killing themselves every single day. And experts warn CNN an even larger, quote, tidal wave of suicides is coming. 3/4 of troops say they joined the military because it promised them a college education. But veterans warn it can be another lie recruiters now tell to get fresh blood.
They're not telling the kids that, yeah, by the time you go through 2 or 3 tours in Iraq, you're not going to be in any shape to go to school.
I'm going to help out in my civilian life because I'd like to be a lawyer. I'd like to go to law school.
Well, I'm a great killer. I know how to blow up bridges, buildings, and people.
It's a lot of fun. Heck, what other job can you fire weapons in?
When you think about war, it's like a video game, and that's how the recruiters portray it too. That's why they have video games for recruitment. Missing from recruiters' talk, missing from the discussion in our society are thousands. Soldiers burned, blinded, amputated limbs, you know, suffering from very strong emotional trauma.
Drone operators are disliked, reports Der Spiegel, even in the US military itself, which calls them, quote, cowardly button pushers. Drone warfare is so unpopular, the army is having to bring back retired people to man the joysticks. Just after Brandon Bryant pressed fire in his New Mexico cubicle, he noticed a little Afghan girl walking round the corner. It was too late. Bosses told him to say it was a dog walking on two legs. After killing dozens the same way, Bryant began, quote, collapsing at work, doubling over and spitting blood, literally sick at having to drone more innocent children from his comfy chair on the other side of the world.
On the battlefield, there are no sides, just bloodshed, total war, every horror witnessed. I wish my eyes would rot.
Bill Galvin is the counselling coordinator at the Centre on Conscience and War, which defends conscientious objectors' rights. He joins us. Thank you very much for coming on. Why is there this epidemic of military suicide, and even most authorities now advise against joining?
The military's own research indicates that except for psychopaths, human beings have an aversion to killing other human beings. Part of the training that they do is specifically designed to override your conscience. And then what happens is later, but your conscience is still there. Guilt that comes into play. It's a real struggle then to learn how to live with yourself and go on, having been a part of these things that you know deep in your heart you probably shouldn't have done. And what that does to the person and the demoralization within the military in general, I think has caused some of the top brass of the military to say, it makes us weaker.
Yeah, why do folks not even know such dreadful facts?
We have this tremendous propaganda machine, the corporate-owned media that is owned a lot of times by the military manufacturers. Most people, I think, don't realize that over half of their taxes go to the military. Almost no one joins because they want to be a part of war. But they mainly joined because they needed money for college.
We don't know how big this wave of action will be. Communities are keeping activities quiet till D-Day to avoid the usual brutal police crackdown. There are plenty of different views on these topics, but 85% of Americans now say the system of government's broken. People are set for real change in their regime. Seek truth from facts. This is The Truth Seeker.